Last week we started looking at chickens and eggs and feedback loops. We looked at the crack in the rock and the buttercup examples. We're trying to help you draw a simple causal loop diagram. The tipping point suggests there's an idea of this butterfly effect. Anybody ever hear the butterfly effect?
Almost 50 years back, an American mathematician and meteorologist named Edward Lorenz came up with a bizarre notion. A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can produce a tornado in Texas, aka the butterfly effect. The essence is that small causes can have large effects. This concept that was initially applied to weather has eventually found its place in economics, aerodynamics, chemistry, among other fields. In chaos theory, the butterfly effect is the sensitive dependency on initial conditions in which a small change at one place can result in large differences in a later state.
But it suggests that small changes can have big effects. Not always, but they can have big effects depending on the context. If the dominoes are set up just properly, it only takes one push to knock them down. The key thing here is the dominoes have to be set up properly. The context in which we're working has to be butterflyable to tip it. And change is necessary. We know change is necessary because we've got a system that's out of control. The industrial food system creates pollution, soil erosion, resource depletion, whether it be water, oil, phosphorus, fertilizers. Treatment of animals is a questionable part of this system. Climate change. Disruption of rural communities, and on and on and on and on. We know that there's problems in the industrial food system. It does two things really well. It produces lots of food, and it produces relatively cheap, and creates a significant degree of wealth for people who own large bits of the planet, large parts of the resource base. But they're off-site. There are things that are not working well with it. And how can we take that system and make it work better? Our food is killing too many of us, according to the New York Times. So nutrition and how we eat all part of this food system. And we looked at the foxes, and their sad little dog, And on Thursday last week we said, is there a way out of this system? The causal loop diagram here, you buy feed from a processor is part of a pattern of behavior where you're basically following instructions of the processor. The structures that are part of that system are the chicken houses, the contracts, the loans, and the mental model is driving that. Food should be cheap. Chickens are just units. They're not really living beings. Lots of other things around the system. But as long as we believe that food must be cheap and chickens don't need to be treated as beings, then this system makes a whole lot of sense. This system, taken to the extreme, causes nitrate pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. It causes fish. There's a Pfiesteria. It's a disease of fish in the Chesapeake Bay. It causes off-site problems. It causes small farmers to go out of business. There's lots of other effects. And the question is there a way out of this trap? And what I suggested last week was not if you're in the trap. If you're in the trap, you're in a causal loop that prevents you from finding your way out unless you have independent wealth and you can lose a lot of money. When you're in that system, it's really hard to find your way out. And some system larger than that subsystem must recognize the problem and begin to correct the problem. And that's a symptom of a larger problem, a larger industrial lifestyle problem that suggests that there are problems in the universe. In addition to having lots and lots of cheap food, we've got other problems that are part of that industrial way of living. And can we find our way out of that trap? Well, I believe that we can. I believe yes, because something always happens. There's something to learn thing happens, that there's a feedback loop when things get really out of control. Something to learn, we call that something always happens. Something to learn happens. Pain that comes from that. Willingness to change increases, and then the non-sustainable action can be decreased. This is a causal loop diagram that expresses an opinion. It's not necessarily the world we live in. I believe it's descriptive of some changes that I've seen in the universe in my lifetime. And boom, something to learn always happens. The bubonic plague was a bad time. Remember that? What was it, the 1300s, 14th century? Half the European population dies, What comes out of that? the end of the feudal system and a new kind of economy in which, because there's less people and there's lots of landscape, people found their way out on the landscape, created a small business, created a small farm, and created a capitalist society that allowed them more opportunity than they had in the feudal system. The bubonic plague was not a great time. It resulted in huge shifts in how people interacted with each other in Europe. Change can happen fast. In my lifetime, there's been civil rights acts, civil rights legislation that ended discrimination in public schools, at least legal discrimination in public schools. In my lifetime, the Berlin Wall came down. When I was growing up, we used to get on this table and prepare for the Russians to be bombing us, because the nuclear bomb was going to come any minute now, and we'd have to get under our tables like that was going to do any good. The Soviet Union unravels, Cuba, which was part of the Soviet Empire, changes. In 1972, there's the Clean Water Act, because the water is polluted, the air is polluted. Things have changed. 2015, we see the Supreme Court ruling for marriage equality. Things have changed over time. And whether that will be a big change, we yet to know. But there have been tipping points. Rosa Parks becomes our classic standard example. Rosa Parks was not just a person who decided not to go to the back of the bus. She was trained by the Highlander Institute, which was a social change institute. She picked her moment in time, and just like Gandhi had the New York Times following as he walked across India to make salt in the Indian Ocean, these were moments in time where the dominoes were lined up, and one push made a huge difference. Anyone ever read The Tipping Point, Gladwell's book? Malcolm Gladwell was a social scientist. Become pretty popular and popularized a number of ideas, but his research, which he takes from other people and popularizes, I think is pretty good. He suggests that there are things called the tipping point where huge changes can happen in small amounts of time. And he based his book largely on commercial changes. His famous one was the Hush Puppies. I remember the shoes, the Hush Puppies, When I was in junior high school, everyone had Hush Puppies. Excuse me. They disappeared. They disappeared until excuse me, sometime in the the early 80s, where they came back. Malcolm documented how they came back. It was basically a group of people living in East Village in New York City that were kind of against the system kind of people, and they thought Hush Puppies was kind of a funny thing to wear. They started wearing them, and it exploded because everyone wanted to be like the cool, different people. So everybody became the same, like the cool, different people in the village, by wearing Hush Puppies. And this has been documented over time. Other tipping points have been described. And this is a little story about tipping point. A couple minutes.
Why do some books become bestsellers, but others don't? Why did it become cool for teenagers to smoke? And most importantly, why does one idea go viral and not others? Gladwell attempts to answer this with an idea he calls the tipping point. That magic moment when an idea, trend, or social behavior crosses a threshold, tips, and spreads like wildfire. The idea can be broken down into 3 principles. They are the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context. Let's take a look at these and see how they contribute to making things go viral. Lesson 1. The law of the few. Gladwell identifies 3 types of people who seem to help epidemics grow quickly. They are connectors, mavens, and salespeople. Let's talk about connectors first. Connectors are those people who seem to know everyone. Everyone knows someone like this. They have more social connections than most people and are great at making friends. Mavens are the people that seem to know everything and always want to help. They are like that guy who is eager to show you how to make the perfect golf swing, or the lady who is excited to show you which skincare products are best and why. They enjoy helping you out simply because they love what they do. Lastly, we have salespeople. Why else would you end up with that tie that you never wear, or those computer gadgets you never use? These people know how to sell, and they love what they do. They let their actions do the talking, and they utilize the power of body language. The second lesson is the stickiness factor. The lesson of stickiness is the same. There is a simple way to package information that under the right circumstances can make it irresistible. All you have to do is find it. That song that sticks in your head, or that thing a person has said that doesn't leave your mind. Gladwell talks about Sesame Street and how they increase children's attention rates by placing words behind the Muppets rather than next to them. Content did not change, just the placement. It's not always the major changes in how we present things that matter, but the small ones. Minor changes can produce massive results. What makes something sticky is different for everything and will always be a mystery. So what can we do? Although Gladwell doesn't hand us the answer on a silver platter, I believe the answer is to experiment. The final lesson is the power of context. Our environment affects our actions. Gladwell cites research that argues that if there are broken windows in a neighbourhood, there will be a higher violent crime rate. People will walk by and conclude that no one is in charge. Soon, more windows will be broken, and the sense of anarchy and carelessness will spread from the building to the whole street.
So what makes a fad, and why do major changes in our society happen so dramatically and suddenly? Those questions are at the heart of a new book called The Tipping Point, How Little Things Make a Big Difference.
So when Gladwell's book first came out, the social activist community grabbed this idea and said, how can we create our own tipping point to create the kind of social change that we want to see? Of context suggests that things often change. We have the willingness to change. We have enough pain and confusion and something to learn. Things get bad enough. Can you create a tipping point? Can you cause the butterfly to flap its wings and begin to change things? Well, Liz Christie did, Mr. Singh did in Rajasthan, and Rosa Parks did when she refused to get to the back of the bus. What we can do is continue to flap our wings and try to create change. Whether it happens or not may be out of our control, but we've got to continue to try.